Welcome, traveler. Settle beneath your blankets. Let your breath grow slow, and let your thoughts drift northward. Tonight we walk beside Gudrun of the Nibelungs, a woman of patience and quiet strength, through snow, firelight, and the long memory of the ancient North. Long ago, in a kingdom along the banks of the Rhine, where the water moved dark and slow beneath willow branches, there stood the hall of King Juki. The hall was built of broad oak timbers, its roof carved with the shapes of ravens and serpents, and at night firelight spilled from its high windows like gold poured across the snow. King Juki was a ruler known not for conquest, but for steadiness. He listened more than he spoke. His queen, Grimhild, was a woman of sharp mind and deep will, said by some to carry knowledge of old charms and herbcraft passed down from her mother's mother. Together they raised 3 sons, Gunnar, Högni, and young Gudrun, and 1 daughter, whose name would be remembered in songs for 1,000 winters after her birth. Her name was Gudrun. As an infant, she was wrapped in wool dyed the color of autumn leaves, and laid before the hearth fire while her brothers took turns watching over her cradle. The hall smelled of pine smoke and roasting meat, of melted snow dripping from boots left by the door, of beeswax candles burning low into the night. Outside, the Rhine moved past dark stones, half frozen at its edges, carrying with it the quiet sound that would become the first music Gudrun ever knew: water over rock, the slow breathing of a world both ancient and patient. In those early winters, Gudrun grew accustomed to the rhythm of the hall, the rising smoke at dawn, the clatter of wooden bowls at the morning meal, her mother's voice low and certain as she gave instruction to the household, her father's footsteps heavy and familiar on the wooden floor. She learned to walk along corridors lined with woven tapestries depicting hunts through pine forests and ships crossing silver fjords. When summer came to the valley of the Nibelungs, meadows beyond the hall bloomed with small white flowers, and Gudrun would walk among them with her nurse, learning the names of birds by their calls: the thrush, the lark, the raven that watched from bare branches even in the warmest months, as ravens always do. Gudrun's brothers were her first companions in the world. Gunnar, the eldest, was solemn and careful, already learning the weight of a future crown. Högni was quieter still, watchful, the kind of presence that made a room feel steady. Young Gudrun, the last born, trailed after his sister through the halls, the 2 of them often found together near the kitchens, where the cook would let them taste warm bread fresh from the stone oven. Queen Grimhild took particular care in her daughter's education. Gudrun learned to weave intricate patterns into cloth, threads of red and deep blue forming scenes of mountains and rivers. She learned the old stories, of Odin walking the 9 worlds in a gray cloak, of the Norns who wove the threads of fate beneath the roots of the great tree Yggdrasil, of dragons who slept atop hoards of gold in caves untouched by daylight. She learned, too, of duty. A king's daughter did not belong only to herself. Her marriage, when it came, would bind kingdoms together or tear them apart, would secure peace along rivers and mountain passes, would carry consequences far beyond the walls of her father's hall. Grimhild taught her this not unkindly, but plainly, the way one teaches a child that winter follows autumn. In the evenings, the family gathered near the great hearth, where flames cast long shadows across carved wooden pillars. Skalds, the poets and storytellers of the North, would sometimes visit, bringing tales from distant courts. Gudrun would sit close to the fire, knees drawn to her chest, listening as voices rose and fell with the rhythm of ancient verse, tales of heroes who walked through fire, of gods who wandered disguised among mortals, of treasures cursed by dwarfish hands. She did not yet know that her own life would become such a tale. Among the stories told in King Juki's hall, none was repeated so often, nor with such hushed reverence, as the tale of the gold of Andvari. Long before Gudrun's birth, the gods Odin, Loki, and Honor had traveled the world in mortal guise. Beside a waterfall, they came upon an otter resting on a stone, and Loki, ever quick to mischief, killed it without thought. That otter, it turned out, was the son of a farmer named Hreidmar, transformed by magic into animal shape. When the gods sought shelter that night, Hreidmar recognized his son's skin and demanded payment for the death, enough gold to fill and cover the otter's hide entirely. To meet this debt, Loki journeyed to a waterfall where a dwarf named Andvari lived in the shape of a fish, guarding a vast hoard of gold beneath the rushing water. Loki captured him and forced him to surrender his treasure. All of it, down to a single ring he tried to keep hidden, a ring that multiplied gold for its bearer. As Andvari released the ring, he spoke a curse over it, that this gold would bring ruin to whoever possessed it, that it would turn brother against brother, that it would carry sorrow through generations yet unborn. The gold paid Hreidemar's debt, but the curse did not end there. Hreidemar's remaining son, Fafnir, slew his own father for the treasure, then withdrew to a lonely heath, where in time greed and guarding transformed him into a great serpent. A dragon coiled eternally around gold that brought him no joy, only solitude and fear of loss. When the skalds finished this tale, the hall would grow quiet, logs settling in the hearth, sparks rising toward the dark rafters. Young Gudrun would watch the flames and wonder what kind of man might one day face such a dragon, and what kind of fate awaited whoever claimed gold born of a curse. She did not know yet that this very gold, and the man brave enough to win it, would shape the whole of her life. Far from the halls of the Nibelungs, in a kingdom touched by both glory and grief, a boy was born named Sigurd. His father, Sigmund, had been a great warrior of the Völsunga line, descended, so the old songs claimed, from Odin himself. But Sigmund had fallen in battle before his son's birth, and Sigurd was raised instead in the court of King Jalprek, under the guidance of a foster father named Regan. Regan was clever beyond ordinary men, skilled in smithcraft and old knowledge, though something in his manner carried a chill, like wind through a half-open door. It was Regan who told young Sigurd of Fafnir the dragon, and of the cursed gold the serpent guarded upon Nidaheath. Regan did not mention, of course, that Fafnir was his own brother, nor that he hoped to use Sigurd to win back gold he believed was rightfully his. Sigurd grew tall and fair-haired, with eyes the gray of northern skies before snowfall. He was trained in sword and horsemanship, and Regan forged for him a blade named Gram, reforged from the broken shards of his father's own sword. A blade so sharp it was said to cut a strand of wool floating on a stream. When Sigurd was grown, he rode into the forest toward Nidaheath, his horse Grani moving sure-footed over moss and fallen pine needles, beneath a canopy where morning light fell in soft beams through the high branches. Mist clung low to the forest floor. Birds called from unseen branches. The world held its breath. There, following Regan's counsel, Sigurd dug a pit along the path the dragon used to drink from a nearby stream, and when Fafnir passed overhead, Sigurd drove his sword upward into the serpent's heart. The old tales say that as Fafnir lay dying, he spoke with Sigurd, not in fury, but with the strange clarity that sometimes comes at the end of a long and lonely life. Fafnir warned the young man of the curse upon the gold, of how it had ruined his own family, of how it would bring sorrow to whoever claimed it next. Sigurd listened with respect, for he was not a man who took pleasure in another's suffering, even a dragon's. And when it was done, he honored the old serpent's passing with a moment of stillness beneath the morning sky before turning to the task that remained. When Sigurd tasted the dragon's blood by accident while roasting its heart upon Regan's request, he gained, the stories say, the strange gift of understanding the speech of birds. From the branches above, small birds whispered warning of Regan's true intent, that the smith planned to kill Sigurd once the gold was claimed, to keep its full fortune for himself. Sigurd, hearing this, made his choice swiftly but without cruelty in his heart. He could not allow betrayal to claim him as it had claimed so many before, and so, with a heavy understanding rather than rage, he ended the threat Regan posed, took up the treasure of Andvari, including the ring that had begun the curse so long before, and rode onward with his horse Grani bearing the weight of cursed and shining gold. From Nidaheath, Sigurd rode north, through valleys where wildflowers bent beneath a soft wind, past lakes so still they mirrored the clouds above without a ripple. Eventually his path led him to a mountain wrapped in flame. Not ordinary fire, but a shimmering wall of light that danced and curled like something between fire and aurora, said to surround the resting place of a Valkyrie under enchantment. This was Brynhild. Long before, Brynhild had served Odin as a chooser of the slain, a warrior spirit who decided which fallen soldiers would be carried to Valhalla. But she had once defied Odin's will, granting victory to a warrior he had not favored, and for this act of independent judgment, Odin placed her into an enchanted sleep, surrounded by flame, until a man without fear should come and wake her. Sigurd, fearless as the old songs always describe him, rode Grani straight through the flame, which parted before him like mist before morning sun. Inside, upon a hill surrounded by quiet, he found Brynhild resting in armor, as though merely asleep rather than enchanted for years uncounted. When he removed her helm and cut the leather straps of her armor, she woke slowly, the way one wakes from a long winter's rest into the soft gold light of spring. She looked upon Sigurd with the calm clarity of someone who has had long years to consider the nature of fate, and the two spoke long into the night beneath a sky scattered with stars, exchanging vows of love beside a fire that crackled low and warm against the mountain wind. Brynhild was wise beyond most mortals, having walked close to the gods themselves. She spoke to Sigurd of runes, of courage, of the difference between fearlessness and recklessness. She told him of a knowledge that often visits those who have stood near death, that glory fades, that gold tarnishes, but that loyalty and honest love endure longer than any hall of stone. They promised themselves to one another there upon the mountain, beneath flame turned to gentle light, beneath stars that seemed, that night, to lean a little closer to the earth. But fate, as the old sagas often remind us, rarely allows love to unfold exactly as the heart intends. Sigurd's path, after leaving Brynhild's mountain with promises of return, led him eventually to the kingdom of King Juki, beside the slow-moving waters of the Rhine. Gudrun, by this time grown into a woman of quiet grace and steady composure, was present in the hall the evening Sigurd arrived. Word of his deeds had traveled far ahead of him: the slaying of Fafnir, the winning of the cursed gold, the awakening of a Valkyrie upon a mountain wrapped in flame. When he stepped through the great doors of her father's hall, broad-shouldered and gray-eyed, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced dragons without flinching, the entire hall seemed to grow brighter, as though the fire in the hearth had been fed fresh wood. King Juki welcomed him with the honor due such a guest. Queen Grimhild, ever watchful of opportunity and alliance, saw at once the value such a marriage might bring to her families standing among the kingdoms of the north. But there is a part of this story that the old sagas tell with particular sorrow, and we will walk through it slowly, as one walks through new snow, taking care with each step. Grimhild, wishing to secure Sigurd as a husband for Gudrun rather than allow his heart to remain bound to Brynhild, prepared a drink for him, brewed from herbs and old charms passed down through generations, a drink meant to cloud memory rather than to harm. Sigurd drank from the offered cup as any guest would, trusting the hospitality of his hosts, and in time, the memory of Brynhild and the promises made upon her mountain grew distant in his mind, like a dream recalled only in fragments upon waking. It is important, as we walk through this part of the story, to hold both truths gently. That what happened was not Sigurd's fault, for memory taken by charm is no true forgetting of the heart's honor, and that what happened was not entirely Grimhild's cruelty either, for she acted as many parents do, seeking security and alliance for her children in a world where such things were never guaranteed. Fate, the Norse believed, moved through human choices the way water moves through stone. Slowly, patiently, and ultimately beyond anyone's full control. In time, Sigurd and Gudrun were wed. The hall was filled with warm light and the scent of mead and roasted meat, with music played on harp and horn, with the kind of joy that, for a season, allows a kingdom to forget the weight of distant consequence. Gudrun, for her part, loved Sigurd with the steady, deep affection of a woman who recognized goodness when she saw it. He was kind to the servants, patient with children, generous to travelers who came seeking shelter. Their early years together, beside the Rhine, beneath summer skies and golden autumn forests, were remembered in later songs as a season of genuine peace. As seasons turned, Gudrun's brother Gunnar reached the age when a king's son must consider marriage of his own, and his attention turned toward the very mountain where Sigurd had once found Brynhild surrounded by flame. Brynhild, still waiting beneath her wall of enchanted fire, had vowed she would marry only the man brave enough to ride through it. A vow she made before her memory of Sigurd's visit had clouded the matter further, for such enchantments touched more than one heart in this story. Gunnar rode to the mountain with hope and determination, but his horse, sensing the otherworldly nature of the flame, would not approach. He borrowed Grani, Sigurd's own horse, but even Grani would not carry any rider toward that fire except Sigurd himself. And so, in a choice made with uneasy hearts on every side, Sigurd and Gunnar exchanged shapes through old magic that Grimhild possessed. Sigurd taking on Gunnar's appearance, riding through the flame in his friend and brother-in-law's form, to win Brynhild's hand on Gunnar's behalf. We pause here, as the old skalds often did, to consider rather than rush past this moment. It carries sorrow, yes, but also the very human truth that even those bound by love and loyalty sometimes make choices, under pressure of circumstance and old enchantment, that ripple forward into grief neither intended. Brynhild, believing she had been won fairly by Gunnar himself, agreed to leave her mountain and travel to the hall of the Nibelungs as his bride. She did not yet know that the man who had ridden through the flame wore another shape, nor that the husband she would soon take was bound, in some quiet chamber of fate, to the very man she had once promised herself to beneath honest stars. The wedding of Brynhild and Gunnar was celebrated with the same warmth as Gudrun's had been. Feasting, music, the golden light of countless candles reflecting off polished mead horns. And for a time, the two households lived beside one another in something resembling peace. But truth, like water beneath winter ice, has a way of eventually finding its way to the surface. One quiet afternoon, as the women of the household walked together along the banks of the Rhine to bathe and wash their hair in the cool current, a disagreement arose between Gudrun and Brynhild, not born of cruelty, but of pride, and of truths too long unspoken. The two women, wading in shallow water beneath willow branches that swayed gently in the river breeze, began comparing the honor of their husbands, as people sometimes do without quite meaning the conversation to turn sharp. Brynhild claimed precedence, believing Gunnar had proven greater courage by riding through the wall of flame. Gudrun, in a moment she would later reflect upon with quiet sorrow, revealed the truth, that it was Sigurd, not Gunnar, who had ridden through the fire that day, wearing borrowed shape through old magic. As proof, she showed Brynhild the ring taken from her hand that day upon the mountain, the very ring that had once belonged to the cursed treasure of Andvari. The water of the Rhine continued its slow, indifferent flow past the two women as the full weight of understanding settled over Brynhild, that her vow had been won not honestly, but through deception, however gently the deception had been offered, and that the man she had once loved upon a mountain of flame was now bound to another by binding vows of marriage. We do not linger here on anger, for anger is not the heart of this story. We linger instead on grief, the particular grief of discovering that fate had moved behind one's back, shaping a life through circumstances beyond one's own choosing. Brynhild withdrew from the household for many days afterward, speaking little, her sorrow settling over the hall like mist over a winter fjord. The old sagas tell us she grew pale and quiet, walking alone along the riverbank in the cold hours before dawn, watching the water move past stones it had known for 1,000 years, the way grief itself moves slowly past a heart that has known love before. What followed has been told in many forms across the long memory of the North, and the old poets do not agree entirely on every detail. But the heart of the tale remains constant, that Brynhild's sorrow and Gunnar's troubled conscience led, in time, to Sigurd's death. Some versions tell us that Brynhild, in her grief, urged Gunnar and his brothers toward this tragic act, believing that only Sigurd's death could restore honor to what had been broken. Other versions tell us the brothers acted from their own complicated mixture of guilt, jealousy over Sigurd's fame, and fear of what truths might otherwise unravel their family's standing. It was young Gudrun, the youngest of Gudrun's brothers, too young to have sworn brotherhood oaths with Sigurd himself, and therefore not bound by the sacred vows that would have made such an act unthinkable, who was given the task, his resolve strengthened, the old songs say, by a drink prepared with serpent's flesh and wolf's meat, meant to harden a gentle heart toward violence it would not otherwise choose. We will not dwell long on the act itself, for this is not the heart of Gudrun's story, only its deepest sorrow. Let it be enough to say that Sigurd, who had faced a dragon without fear, who had ridden through enchanted flame for another's sake, who had shown kindness to every traveler and servant in his household, was struck down while resting, his death swift, the hall falling into a silence deeper than any winter night. Gudrun's grief when she woke to find her husband gone, was a sorrow so complete the old poems describe her as unable even to weep at first. A grief beyond tears, beyond sound, like snow falling so heavily it silences even the wind. The hall that had once rung with music and firelight grew quiet in the days that followed. Outside, snow fell over the Rhine valley, soft and unceasing, as though the sky itself wished to cover the world in something gentle, something that might ease, even slightly, the weight of what had happened. In the long winter that followed Sigurd's death, Gudrun withdrew from the hall, walking instead through snow-covered forests where pine branches bent low beneath their white burden, where the only sound was her own breath and the soft crunch of snow beneath careful steps. The old sagas describe this period of mourning with unusual tenderness, recognizing grief not as weakness, but as a necessary season, much like winter itself, a time the spirit must pass through before spring can return. She found herself drawn to the riverbank, to the same waters where she had once quarreled with Brynhild, now frozen at their edges, dark and slow moving at their center. She would sit upon a smooth stone there in the cold hours before dawn, watching mist rise from the unfrozen water, listening to ice creak and settle along the banks. It is said that for many days, Gudrun could not speak of her sorrow at all, the way deep wounds sometimes resist even the comfort of words. Other women of the household, and eventually her own mother, sat beside her in silence, offering only presence rather than counsel, understanding that some griefs must simply be endured rather than solved. Slowly as a northern spring arrives, with single patches of green appearing first along south-facing slopes while snow still clings to shadowed valleys, Gudrun began to return to the rhythms of life. She resumed her weaving, finding in the careful repetition of thread over thread something steadying, something that asked only patience rather than answers. Brynhild, in her own profound sorrow over the role she had played in the tragedy, did not long survive Sigurd. The old songs tell that she chose to join him upon the funeral pyre, believing their fates, twisted as they had become by enchantment and deception, were nonetheless bound together beyond death. We honor her memory here not with judgment, but with the same compassion the sagas themselves extend to her, a woman of great wisdom and great honor, undone by circumstances larger than her own choosing, who in her final act sought to mend, in whatever way she understood possible, what fate had broken. The dual loss of husband and the woman who had once been dear to her own household weighed heavily upon Gudrun. Yet within her, something steady remained. The same quiet strength that had watched over her cradle as an infant, that had learned patience at her mother's side, that had walked calmly through royal halls since childhood. Grief did not break her. It changed her, deepened her, the way a river is changed but not destroyed by the stones it must pass around. In the years that followed, Gudrun lived a life turned inward, finding comfort in small daily rhythms rather than grand events. She walked often along forest paths where golden autumn leaves fell silently around her shoulders, where deer moved unhurried between birch trees, where the world continued its patient turning regardless of human sorrow. She spent time with her young niece and nephews, the children of her brothers, finding in their laughter and curiosity a gentle reminder that life renews itself even after great loss. She told them, in the evenings beside the hearth, some of the old stories she herself had learned as a child, of Odin's wanderings, of the Norns weaving fate beneath Yggdrasil's roots, though she found herself, in time, leaving out the tale of Andvari's cursed gold, unwilling to burden young hearts with sorrows not yet their own. Her mother, Grimhild, watchful as always of her family's future, eventually began to consider the question of a second marriage for her daughter. Gudrun resisted this thought for many seasons, finding the idea, at first, like asking a tree to bloom again the same year it had been struck by lightning. But time, the old sagas remind us again and again, moves like a river, slow, certain, and ultimately beyond resistance. Gudrun began, in small ways, to imagine a future beyond grief. She watched the seasons turn from the golden fire of autumn to the white stillness of winter to the soft green return of spring, and understood, in her own quiet way, that her own heart might follow a similar pattern. In time, word came from the kingdom of the Huns, ruled by King Atli, brother to Brynhild, a powerful ruler whose lands stretched across wide eastern plains far from the gentle rivers and pine forests of Gudrun's youth. Atli sought Gudrun's hand in marriage, in part for the alliance it would bring between two great families, and in part, perhaps, from his own complicated grief over his sister's death and the role the Nibelung family had played in the events surrounding it. Grimhild, ever mindful of her family's position, encouraged this match, and Gudrun, after long consideration beside the same riverbank where she had once mourned, agreed to journey eastward and become Atli's wife. The journey itself, the old songs tell us, carried its own quiet beauty. Long days traveling across open plains beneath wide skies, through forests of dark pine that gave way gradually to grasslands stretching toward a horizon broader than any Gudrun had known in her riverside childhood. At night, the company would make camp beneath skies thick with stars, the northern lights sometimes rippling green and pale violet across the darkness. A reminder, perhaps, that beauty and mystery continued in the world even after great sorrow. Atli's hall, when at last they arrived, was vast, built upon open land rather than nestled among forest and river as her father's hall had been. The customs of his people differed somewhat from her own, yet Gudrun, ever adaptable, settled into this new life with the same quiet steadiness she had shown throughout every season of her story. For some years, this second marriage carried a measure of genuine peace. Gudrun bore children in this new land, and found, in motherhood, another rhythm to steady her days. Small hands reaching for hers, small voices asking after old stories. The particular joy of watching new life unfold even in a heart that had known great loss. But fate, as we have walked together through this story, rarely allows long seasons of unclouded peace, and the gold of Andvari, cursed so long ago beside a distant waterfall, had not yet finished its slow work through the generations. Years passed, and King Atli's mind began to turn, as the minds of kings sometimes do, toward the treasure that Sigurd had once won from the dragon Fafnir, gold that had passed, after Sigurd's death, into the keeping of Gudrun's brothers, Gunnar and Högni. Atli sent word inviting the brothers to visit his hall, framed as a gesture of family bonds and celebration, though an undertone of deeper purpose moved beneath the polite invitation, the way cold water moves beneath a thin layer of ice. Gudrun, sensing the danger her brothers might face, attempted to warn them. The old sagas tell of a message she sent bound with a wolf's hair, a quiet symbol meant to caution that wolfish intent lay hidden within Atli's invitation. But the messenger, perhaps fearful or perhaps careless, did not deliver the warning clearly enough, and Gunnar and Högni, bound by their own codes of honor and unwilling to appear fearful before in-laws and allies, chose to make the journey east regardless. We pause here to reflect, as the old poets often did, on the particular sorrow of seeing danger clearly and yet being unable to prevent it. A sorrow Gudrun would carry through the remainder of this chapter of her life, watching events unfold like a slow flood that no single voice could halt. Her brothers arrived at Atli's hall with their retinue, received at first with apparent warmth, firelight and feasting filling the long hall just as it had during Gudrun's own wedding years before. But beneath the surface of hospitality, Atli's true intention soon revealed itself. A demand for the location of Sigurd's treasure, the cursed gold of Andvari, now held in secret by Gunnar alone. What followed tested the brothers in ways that revealed, even amid tragedy, a quality of courage and loyalty that the old sagas honor with particular reverence. Gunnar, captured and threatened, refused to reveal the location of the treasure even when faced with great hardship, declaring that as long as his brother Högni lived, the secret would remain safe between them. For Högni alone shared full knowledge of where the gold lay hidden beneath the waters of a distant river. Atli's men, seeking to remove this obstacle, took Högni's life first, presenting evidence of this to Gunnar in hopes of finally extracting the secret. But Gunnar, the old songs tell with solemn admiration, found a strange peace in this moment, for with Högni gone, only he himself knew the treasure's resting place, and he resolved that this knowledge would die with him rather than enrich the man who had betrayed his family's trust. We tell this part of the story not to dwell on violence, for that is not the heart of what matters here, but to honor the deep loyalty between brothers that persisted even unto the end, a loyalty that Gudrun, watching from within Atli's own hall, helpless to prevent what unfolded, would carry as both wound and inspiration for the remainder of her days. Gunnar's final act, the old sagas tell, was carried out with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that some forms of wealth, honor, loyalty, the keeping of a sacred trust, mattered more than gold, however vast, however cursed, However much suffering had been spent in its winning and re-winning across the generations since Andvari's curse was first spoken beside that ancient waterfall. The loss of both brothers, following so closely upon the earlier loss of Sigurd, brought Gudrun to perhaps the deepest sorrow of her long life. The old poems describe her grief in this period with the same imagery used throughout the saga. Snow falling without end, rivers running dark and cold beneath winter ice, a heart grown heavy as stone. Yet even here, the saga reminds us of Gudrun's particular strength. Not the strength of a warrior wielding sword or spear, but the deeper strength of endurance, of a spirit that continues forward even when every immediate reason for continuing seems to have been stripped away. The old tales tell that Gudrun, in time, took a measure of justice into her own hands regarding Atli's betrayal of her brothers, an act the ancient poets recount with the same dreamlike, symbolic distance with which they treat the rest of this saga's harder moments. We need not dwell on the details here, for our purpose tonight is not vengeance, but understanding. Understanding that even in grief, even in circumstances of profound betrayal, Gudrun remained a woman who acted according to her own deep sense of justice and loyalty to her family's memory, rather than simply enduring whatever fate placed before her. In the aftermath of these events, Gudrun chose to leave the kingdom of the Huns, walking once more into a new chapter of her long and winding life, much as a river, blocked by stone, finds a new course rather than ceasing to flow. The years that followed carried Gudrun across many landscapes of the ancient north, through pine forests where snow fell soft and constant through winter months, along fjords where fishing boats rested at anchor beneath skies streaked pink and gold at evening, past standing stones erected by peoples even older than her own, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, holding their silent watch over valleys and hillsides. In these years of wandering, Gudrun's reputation grew not merely as a king's daughter or a hero's widow, but as a woman of deep wisdom in her own right. Someone whose life had passed through more sorrow and transformation than most could imagine, and who had emerged not bitter, but reflective, generous with the understanding her hardships had given her. Travelers who crossed her path in these years described a woman calm in bearing, quick to offer shelter to those in need, patient with children, and possessed of a quiet authority that came not from rank alone but from the depth of lived experience. She would sit by hearth fires in halls not her own, sharing portions of her story when asked, though always gently, always with care for what listeners, particularly young listeners, might be ready to hear. She married once more in these later years, the old sagas tell us, to a king named Jonakr, finding in this third union a measure of peace that her earlier marriages, shaped so heavily by fate and the lingering curse of Andvari's gold, had not been permitted to fully hold. With Jonakr, she raised additional children, and found, in this quieter chapter, the kind of contentment that comes not from the absence of sorrow in one's past, but from having carried that sorrow long enough to know it would not, after all, be the final word of one's story. Even in these later, gentler years, the old curse first spoken beside Andvari's waterfall had not entirely finished its slow work. Gudrun's daughter from her marriage to Sigurd, a young woman named Svanhild, met her own tragic fate in a distant kingdom, the details of which the old sagas tell with the same dreamlike sorrow used throughout this long story. When word reached Gudrun of this final loss, the poems tell us that something in her, which had endured so very much across so many decades, finally allowed itself a moment of complete and unguarded grief. Not the silent, breathless grief of her youth beside Sigurd's body, but a fuller, more articulate sorrow, the sorrow of a woman old enough to understand fully the weight of all she had carried, and brave enough to let it be witnessed. Yet even this final grief, the old sagas insist, did not break her. She gathered her remaining sons and spoke to them of honor, of loyalty, of the responsibility to remember rightly the deeds of those who had come before. Sigurd's courage, Gunnar and Högni's unbroken loyalty to one another, Brynhild's tragic wisdom, even her own mother Grimhild's complicated mixture of love and ambition. In this way, Gudrun transformed her grief, as she had so many times before, into something that might serve those who came after her. Not erasing sorrow, but weaving it into wisdom, the way a skilled hand weaves dark thread alongside bright into a single, complete tapestry. In her final years, Gudrun is remembered by the old sagas as a woman who had walked further through sorrow and resilience than nearly any other figure in the ancient stories of the North, and yet who remained, until her last days, a source of steadiness and quiet wisdom for those around her. She lived to see her grandchildren grow, to tell them, in her own unhurried way, the stories of dragons and cursed gold, of valkyries upon mountains wrapped in flame, of brothers whose loyalty held firm even unto death, of a husband whose kindness was remembered long after his fall. She told these stories not as warnings against living fully, but as evidence that a life could hold immense sorrow and immense meaning together, the way winter and spring together complete a single turning year. The poets who later composed the great sagas of the North placed Gudrun's story among their most cherished, not because her life was free of hardship, for it was perhaps among the most sorrow-laden of any figure in the old tales, but because she met each hardship with a particular combination of grief honestly felt and strength quietly maintained, never allowing loss to become the entirety of her story. In her, listeners across centuries have found a model not of a life without pain, but of a life that continued, with grace and patience, through pain toward something resembling peace. And so, traveler, we arrive at the end of Gudrun's long and winding road, much as a river, after passing through mountain and forest and wide open plain, finally reaches the quiet stillness of the sea. Picture her now, in memory, standing once more beside flowing water, perhaps the Rhine of her childhood, perhaps some nameless northern river she encountered in her later wanderings. Her hair silvered now with age, her shoulders carrying the weight of decades with the same quiet dignity she carried as a young woman watching her brothers play beside that very water, long before dragons and cursed gold and enchanted mountains entered the story of her life. Above her, the sky has turned the deep blue of late evening, scattered with the first stars of night. Somewhere to the north, faint ribbons of green and violet light begin their slow dance across the horizon. The same northern lights that watched over her wedding to Sigurd, her grief beside his funeral fire, her long journey eastward to Atli's hall, her quiet final years beside Jonneker's hearth. The water moves past her feet, unhurried, carrying small pieces of bark and fallen leaves toward distant places she will never see. The way her own story, once it is told and retold by skalds and halls across the north, will carry forward to listeners who will never know her face, yet will recognize, in the shape of her sorrows and her endurance, something true about what it means to carry loss without being consumed by it. The fire behind her in some distant hall continues to burn low, logs settling softly into embers, the last sounds of evening fading into the deeper hush of approaching sleep. Let her story settle over you now the way snow settles over a sleeping valley, soft, complete, without urgency. Let the rivers of her journey carry your thoughts gently downstream, past sorrow honestly felt, past loyalty that did not break, past love that, even when shaped by fate beyond anyone's full control, remained real and worth remembering. Rest now, beneath your own quiet sky, carrying with you only the soft, lingering warmth of Gudrun's enduring strength, and let sleep come, slow and certain, like the patient turning of the northern stars above a valley at peace.